Okay, everybody, good evening. Welcome to the Executive Scrutiny Board on the 16th of March 2026. We'll get straight into it. Do we have any apologies, please? Okay, Councillor Rawson. Fine, no problem at all. Okay, Councillor Eyre, no problem. Okay, noted. Item 2 then is late items. There are none. Item 3, standard 1, any declarations of interest? Nope, okay. Item 4 is the minutes of the meetings held on the 9th of February 2026. They're attached. Are there any questions, queries, notes on that? Are you okay with that? Move them. Okay, thank you. Item 5, another standing item, is the forward plan, and handily we've got new items on, hasn't got a page number, but there's two. There's Schools Capitals Grant Programme 26-27 and a Send Funding Award, brackets S. We do have the ability, if we want to look at any of these in more detail and invite the Cabinet member to join us as well, if anybody wants to do that on those two items. Otherwise, we can move on. Okay, no problem. Apologies.
Thank you, Chair. Just to make you aware that I think that forward plan that you're looking at was published in February, but since the publication for the agenda of this meeting, there was one published last week. So that is available on the Democracy Portal if people want to see the most up-to-date one. It's just obvious that happened after the publication of these papers. So.
Thank you. So it's the electronic version which will have the extra item on it. Okay. Do we know what that is? Just yeah, no problem. Just 30 seconds.
So new additions are Best Start in Early Life Family Hubs. This is in the People Directorate. End-to-End Fostering Hub, again, People Directorate. An update to the Corporate Complaints process in the Chief Exec Directorate, and Derby Poverty Strategy as well.
Thank you. I'll make a note of that, and next time I'll ensure that I've got the electronic in the paper so that there's the latest information to relate to the members. Okay, moving on then to overview and scrutiny forward plan. Again, a standing item. We're sort of heading towards the end. I said this last time, but we're heading towards the end of the municipal year. We can refer items again to the various ONS boards. We actually did that with the Climate Change Action Plan, and I'm part of the board that discussed that, and we had a Cabinet member along with senior officers as well. It was a very productive session there. So that just shows you that we can refer as an executive board to the various other executive scrutiny boards. Obviously, what I suggest is that we're coming, like I say, at the end of the municipal year. But what I would probably like to do, and I'll speak to Alex about this, is before we finish our final meeting before the AGM, probably it may be worthwhile having a think as to anything that we might be able to recommend for the incoming chairs to consider. I'm very keen to ensure that all ONS hits the ground running, and we were discussing this earlier on about the potential lag between people settling into new roles and then getting things working, and some of the boards are only 4 or 5 meetings a year. So I think as chair I'll definitely look at that, and if we can involve members as board members as well. It's not a case of dictating to the new boards, the new chairs, as to what they should or shouldn't do, but I think it may be helpful for us to use our expertise and our experience over the last year or so to maybe present options for them to help them along the way, potentially. And we can do that as well with some meetings as well with the various chairs, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Completely agree. It ties in nicely with the report I'm here to present later on the agenda, but that idea that the work programming for scrutiny boards is an iterative process that goes on throughout the municipal year, and absolutely you can, irrespective of any changes in membership between boards, boards can plan ahead for the next municipal year and in particular make the best use of that first meeting of the municipal year. As you say, some boards only have 4 or 5 meetings per year, so that early June meeting, sometimes it's sensible to plan items for that meeting ahead of time.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item 7, which is Council Cabinet responses and scrutiny. Sorry, Councillor Bolton.
Sorry, Matt, I just really think before we get off that subject, we were concerned as a board, weren't we, of the restrictions to the Personnel Committee, and because a lot of their workload had gone on to scrutiny, I just feel we should have a report back on how that has worked, because those of us on Personnel Committee were a little concerned that the workings of the Personnel Committee would be lost with it going into a scrutiny role. So I didn't want to lose track of that, just for noting, really.
So, Alex, can you duly note that so we can have at the appropriate point just some mechanism? You may even be able to cover it with the item, possibly. I don't know if you can shoehorn it in. If not, if we can find a way to actually have that sort of discussed at some point soon.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We can bring that back. I think the changes in relation to the Personnel Committee were around ensuring there was an appropriate delineation between the Personnel Committee as a decision-making body and scrutiny as the body that's tasked with monitoring performance. And I think historically some of the items that were coming to the Personnel Committee were more traditionally associated with the scrutiny role rather than that decision-making role. But absolutely, we can bring something back to scrutiny about how that's been working. We're still only around 6 months into those changes, so it might be something to bring back in the later part of the next municipal year, perhaps.
Thank you. Okay, no problem at all. So item 7 is the other standing item, recommendations from ourselves as an exec scrutiny board. I think we got, was it 2-1 or 1-1, I think, football analogy. We were noted and then 1 was accepted. I'm trying to find the notes here. Maybe it's in the electronic version, but yes, that's right, yeah. Okay, good. But then the appendix anyway, so obviously we do have the ability to send recommendations for all these items to Cabinet to consider. Okay, item 8 then. Alex, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report on your agenda this evening presents the draft overview and scrutiny protocol for endorsement by this board and recommends it to full council for formal adoption as part of the council's constitution. Many members will be aware that this protocol was first developed as part of the constitutional review when that was undertaken with the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny in 2024. And that review identified that whilst the constitution sets out formal scrutiny powers and procedures, there is limited guidance in the Constitution on how scrutiny should operate in practice, and specifically in terms of culture, behaviours and working relationships between different stakeholders in that process. Following a further period of review since that constitutional review and subsequent consultation with an informal meeting of scrutiny chairs, cabinet members, senior officers and circulation to councillors more broadly, this document's now brought forward for approval and onward referral. It also underpins some of the new working practices that Chair yourself will be familiar with over the last 12 months, which includes routine consideration of the overarching overview and scrutiny forward plan by this board, quarterly informal meetings of scrutiny chairs and vice chairs with scrutiny officers, and a more thematic approach to work programming by scrutiny review boards, where each meeting covers a particular set of service areas or themes. I think it's important at this stage that I emphasise, I'd be clear about the scope of the protocol. What this protocol doesn't do is that it doesn't alter the structure of the council's established overview and scrutiny boards, nor does it amend the overview and scrutiny procedure rules which are in the Constitution. Those formal powers are entirely unchanged. Instead, it seeks to complement those rules by establishing a framework for ensuring scrutiny operates to best effect. So that focuses on the purpose and role of scrutiny within the council's overall governance arrangements, the culture within which scrutiny should operate, so one of mutual respect, candour, a commitment to continuous improvement from everyone involved, and also the behaviours and working relationships that are expected between members, officers and partners in the conduct of formal scrutiny meetings. A central theme of this piece of work is a recognition that scrutiny capacity is finite, and that means the time of yourselves as scrutiny members, but also officers tasked with supporting the scrutiny function, and also of the cabinet members, senior officers and partners who are invited to give account to those boards. The protocol therefore places a significant emphasis on ensuring scrutiny capacity is, scrutiny activity is focused, proportionate and capable of delivering tangible improvements to residents and services. In particular, the work programming section, and linking in with what we were discussing on that earlier item, sets out a framework within which topic selection can be guided. So looking at those things that are strategically important to the council, so reflected in corporate documents like the council plan, those things that affect the delivery of services to vulnerable residents in particular, those issues that are particularly complicated or cross-cutting that might require the input from multiple scrutiny boards, and importantly as well, those issues that are either locally or politically contentious, i.e. they reflect legitimate concerns of residents. And what this protocol seeks to do is that work programmes and items that are selected for scrutiny, they're intended to be proportionate in terms of their desired outcomes, data-led, and drawing on the rich sources of data that are available from within the council. So that might mean performance data, risk registers that are held within services, public feedback through consultation exercises, and also the council cabinet forward plan that gives that indication of business that is due to be considered. It also looks to provide a shared, a sort of single accessible framework for everyone who is involved in the scrutiny process. So it sets out clear roles for different stakeholders. So, for example, expectations that chairs and vice chairs provide visible leadership, manage work programmes proactively, and champion scrutiny as a governance tool for the organisation as a whole. That expectation on scrutiny members that all members attend meetings well prepared, ready to engage independently and also treat witnesses respectfully. On cabinet members to engage constructively with scrutiny when asked to attend, and also maintain that clear separation between their roles as decision makers and your roles as scrutineers. Likewise on senior officers to support scrutiny openly, provide timely and high quality information and also speak with candour. And I think importantly also those partner organisations who the council holds formal scrutiny powers over, because in those circumstances in particular, we are asking people who are quite unfamiliar with how we work as a local authority to enter an environment that can sometimes be quite unfamiliar or intimidating. And finally, it also deals with the role of the statutory scrutiny officer, which is myself, and that duty to promote, support and provide guidance to everyone who is involved in the scrutiny process. One area that it does focus on is it clarifies processes around the establishment of task and finish groups and also providing timely responses to scrutiny recommendations. So it recognises that not all topics are suitable for scrutiny during formal committee meetings like these, and some are better explored via informal task and finish groups where members, officers or partners with specialist expertise can thoroughly examine an issue before reporting back to a more formal committee setting. Again, on recommendations, it reiterates that requirement in the procedural rules that timely responses are provided to scrutiny recommendations, and where scrutiny recommendations aren't accepted, that decision makers provide reasons for that rejection as well. So in terms of next steps, hopefully councillors will support endorsement of this protocol and onward referral to full council. It's intention that the protocol will take effect from the start of the new municipal year in May and will serve as a practical tool for those initial work programming meetings at the start of the municipal year, and ensuring that first meeting of the year is also used to best effect. It will support all those colleagues and partners who are invited to give account to scrutiny to be well prepared for those meetings, and also provide a reference point when questions arise around expected behaviours or processes, recognising that for a lot of colleagues, attending a scrutiny meeting is a somewhat unusual or slightly intimidating experience. So in summary, the protocol is intended to strengthen the effectiveness and impact of the scrutiny process as a whole within a framework of accountability, candour and transparency. It does so without altering the council's existing scrutiny structures or procedural rules, instead focusing on culture. And we hope within time we can embed those principles within our ways of working and improve the impact of scrutiny activity for the council's residents and service users. And I hope that having been provided with previous opportunities to input into the development of this document, that the board is willing to support it. So thank you for your time, councillors. The board's invited to endorse the draft scrutiny protocol and recommend the document to council in May for formal adoption as part of the constitution.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much for the work that you've done on this yourself and other officers. I know that you've worked hard on it, and I think it's a fine document and report to go to full council. Councillor Bolton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you to Alex for doing the work. I can recall, however, when we had our working group on the Constitution, which unfortunately didn't get anywhere when it came to council, was it last year, the year before? What mechanisms are there in place, A, if things aren't working well, to modify, and B, what happens when we are eventually a north or south or whatever? Will it need to be looked at again when we are obviously a different authority? What mechanisms are there to adapt it? Thank you.
Yeah, so Alex, I think I'm not going to preempt what you're going to say, but obviously that was a very different process, wasn't it? That whole suggestion or report to change the constitution. This is a procedural document, isn't it? But I'm very interested in LGR as well as to what your thoughts are moving forward, because scrutiny is scrutiny to a degree. So I would assume that this probably would be the exemplar to actually adopt to the new unitary authority. But I don't know what your thoughts are on those two items.
In terms of modification to this protocol, I think there's always that opportunity for us to consider how effectively it's working. I think within the protocol itself, there's a requirement that we, as part of the Overview and Scrutiny annual report that goes to council, that we reflect on the effectiveness of this protocol. And clearly through this committee, through a working group, we can always recommend changes. It's intended to be iterative and not perfect at the first point of asking. In terms of that broader question around LGR, I think irrespective of the outcome of LGR, it's important that this council has strong scrutiny arrangements in place. At the very least, this council is going to continue to exist for 2 more years, and during that time, particularly in the second year, when potentially a shadow authority is operating, there's going to be an important role for scrutiny committees to ensure that services that are transferring over or powers that are transferring are doing so effectively. I think the Audit and Governance Committee have looked at this quite recently. There's going to still be a really important role for committees on the outgoing authorities, for want of a better word, to have a really active role in examining the decisions that are being made around LGR and how that transfer is taking place. Obviously, I can't speak for colleagues at other authorities, but I would like to say that if we can adopt a really strong protocol within Derby City Council now, then when those meetings start taking place around looking at the governance arrangements for those new authorities, we can confidently step forward and say we do things really well in Derby. We've got a document that we can use as the basis for scrutiny activity under the new authorities. And I would add that the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, who granted a couple of years ago now, but they were helped with the formation of this document, they are still considered to be the sort of exemplar for effective local authority scrutiny, and we would look to replicate some of their processes and procedures that are captured in a document called the Good Scrutiny Guide in whatever it is that is put in place when governance arrangements for LGR are stood up.
Thank you. A couple of questions. Oh, you go first, Councillor Kerr.
I'll start with an apology because I'm not sure whether I should have seen an earlier version of this or whether this is the first time I've seen it, because if I had been sent it earlier, I should have responded sooner. And I think part of the issue might be related to paragraph 4.11, which says the work programme will be managed throughout regular meetings of the Chair of Exec Scrutiny, the Chairs of Scrutiny Review Boards and relevant officers. Now, that grouping, because of the way we manage our annual meetings of the Council, can exclude political parties, so that political parties will not have a voice in that discussion to identify forthcoming issues, cabinet decision topics that might want usefully to be added. So I think there needs to be a different group, and if it was that group that has been involved in the development of this protocol, then that may be why I've missed it out on the steps. so far. I think the concept, I think the principle of doing it is really good, and I hope it results in a better, broader and more holistic look at things and people working together more closely. So the principles I'm absolutely fine with, but some of the detail in the document, such as that paragraph, I think aren't yet right. And another couple of examples I can give you is in 4.6, we're talking about some of the things we particularly want to look at, but the delivery of large-scale universal services are not included, whereas, you know, if we think we wanted to do a review of how the changes to recycling is going, it doesn't hit any of those bullet points, but yet it might be something that would have been of real interest. So I think there's something that we're excluding within that. And it says matters that have a particular level of complexity, and I have no idea whether that particular level means it's simple or it's incredibly complex, because particular doesn't define the level we're talking about. I've got several other points, which again, sometimes seem to be defining what we are really wanting to achieve. So in the third bullet point under 6.5 at the bottom of that page, it says that we're sort of looking towards a shared set of scrutiny priorities and outcomes. And I don't think we should anticipate what the outcome is going to be. I think we should go into a scrutiny process with an open mind. So rather than judging whether we're going to do something on that basis. And strangely, 6.13 seems to be very prescriptive to say, tell cabinet members where they're going to sit at a particular seat or desk. It seems almost like sort of magistrate's court or something where people have a particular role. I think the guidance under officers and partners starting at 6.15 is really helpful, but I don't think the order follows through. I think it's, you know, it talks about where advance notice is being provided and we're reading a document first, but that comes at the end of that set of paragraphs. There's under the responses to recommendations, we're at this point only talking about Cabinet's attention to an issue, whereas at other points in the protocol it talks about other groups or bodies that you may be referring back to, which could be ones from outside the council. And there is reference to that later on where it doesn't refer to, it refers to officers rather than, or staff rather than from other places. Do we really, under 8.3, always need the relevant cabinet member to attend to present a response to all recommendations from all meetings? You know, we've just talked about 3 that we put into our last meeting. Do we expect the cabinet members to be here for that? Because I'm not sure that's going to add value and make good use of their time. And again, in terms of talking about adding value, 9.5 talks about looking at where scrutiny may add value, and we're again prejudging where it may add value rather than leaving that up to the members of scrutiny through the process that I highlighted initially in 4.11 to judge whether it can make value. And under 10.3, it says if the referral is accepted, things will be made relevant, and if it's refused, wouldn't it be nice to know why it's been refused? But there isn't a paragraph or a point there that says if it's refused, this is going to be explained why. I'm happy to go through that with the officers, and I thank them very much for having got to this point. But I would suggest, Chair, that as we have another meeting before May, that we actually ask this to come back to the next meeting.
Thank you, Councillor. A couple of notes. You went through a lot there. 4.11. I think we have to be careful not to spread the net too widely. This is about the chair, whether it be me or anybody else, and the relevant chairs being able to discuss various things in terms of ONS. It could quite easily turn into a mini full council without the framework if it isn't defined. You know, how far do you define it? You know, if everybody can attend it, it kind of negates the purpose of having chairs to be able to discuss things. So.
May I just come back on that?
Yeah.
I think at the moment there aren't any chairs or vice chairs from Labour as well as from the Liberal Democrats. So taking that group, they're excluding 2 of the political groups within the council who have places on scrutiny. But they don't actually happen to have chairs or vice chairs.
It's never going to be perfect, but the AGM elects chairs, vice chairs, and it's kind of like, well...
I agree. I'm just saying that because we're excluding that, I think that to ensure that you have got every political party represented as part of that discussion, because we are here, sitting here in a Widdicombe balance, and I think that if we are going to do justice to engagement with scrutiny, then all political parties need to have engagement with the setting of the scrutiny programme. And using this mechanism,
that can be done via the actual boards themselves, and you strain into setting up a committee system when we don't have one, in my view. But anyway, I take your point, but I still believe there needs to be some kind of rigid process for chairs to actually discuss things. It's not like they're excluding, because it will all be fed back. It's just ensuring that there's a strong overview and scrutiny process, and the chairs are the chairs. So it's only right, I think, that they would lead on some of that work. On the other thing, I think you spoke about recommendations, and actually I think that we do that regularly to Cabinet on the Cabinet agendas, and I've been part of a recommendation from one of the boards that I was on that went all the way through. It took probably about 9 months to a Cabinet meeting where I was able to present it. And I found that it wasn't the outcome I wanted, but it was a very positive process from start to finish. And it really was an important issue to me and other people in the board. And I think that that's a really important mechanism for me, that I think that when it comes to this being adopted, hopefully at full council, that when the various chairs are elected in the AGM, that this can be referred to, that mechanism is not only available to them, but encouraged, because it's part of their whole ONS process. It's not just our board making recommendations to Cabinet. I would personally like to see more from all of the ONS, because I think it really does add value. Anyway, Alex, on the other points, there was many of them.
I think just on the broad points, in terms of prior consultation with members, there has been quite a significant period of consultation, initially with the chairs and vice chairs group, then with the Cabinet, and then simultaneously with all councillors and senior officers. And I think it was circulated to all councillors on just before Christmas, and there was a 4-week consultation period over Christmas where we invited sort of technical feedback on the content of the protocol. And I think there were several councillors who did give some really good quality feedback on that process. What I would also say, and reiterate the point you've just made, Chair, that it's not that the chairs and vice chairs group is determining the work programme. They are putting together an initial work programme that is then presented to the board to be agreed. So, clearly there has to be someone that ourselves as scrutiny officers liaise with initially to try and shape that work programme, and then the board agree to it. At any point, a member could approach a chair and ask for an item to be included on the work programme. The other point I'd make in response to your comments, Councillor Kerr, is in the opening statement of this document, it talks about how this is designed to complement the overview and scrutiny procedure rules. And the procedure rules do include specific rules around the requirement for the Cabinet, for example, to report back within a particular time frame on recommendations that are made by scrutiny. This document is guidance or framework, for want of a better word, rather than a set of rules. So in terms of, I think you mentioned in particular 4.6, they are suggestions. You are not limited to items that meet those 4 criteria. They are just a means by which members who are involved in scrutiny can try and narrow down those. I'm sure you come into the municipal year with a long list of topics that you would like to scrutinise, but recognising that time is finite and clearly some criteria need to be applied in order to narrow down those topics. So, as I said, if we consider this document in terms of, a guidance document that chairs, vice chairs, scrutiny members, scrutiny officers, partners can refer to when undertaking those conversations, both at the start of the municipal year and throughout subsequent meetings, I think it it fulfils its purpose. And I'm really keen for us to bring this forward for approval to council. We've talked about it for quite a long time now, and I think whilst obviously prepared to take away any comments from members of the board, I'd be quite keen to refer this into council, and then with time, as we see how it operates, we can make further refinements.
So Councillor Wright. Oh, sorry, Cecile. No, it's Councillor John Wright, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a very well thought through, researched and presented document, so I'm certainly happy to support it. I've just got a couple of comments really on implementation. The key responsibilities of the board are under paragraph 2.1, and there's a couple of areas where I don't think, in my experience, that we do sufficient. And one of them is contribute to development of policy by the council and its partners. And an example of that, I think, is the duty to cooperate under the local plan. This might be solved by reorganisation, but I think, you know, I would see that as a key area that we could have scrutinised other neighbourhood councils on. And the final point is a review how decisions and council's policies are implemented based on an insight of a range of sources, including local people. I don't think we do enough of that. And apart from things like the budget and the corporate plan, where we do go out to the public, we don't really ask, apart from, you know, when councillors feedback their own experience, ask what people really think about delivery of services. So that would be a couple of areas I think that, subject to all the other constraints, that we could do more of next year, or this group could do more of next year.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the whole point about enabling the chairs to do more and to ensure that they understand that they can. One of the examples would be, because I know that there's the Derby housing market area, HMA, Derby, Amber Valley, South Derbyshire, etc. And those meetings are for the cabinet members and the relevant officers to meet, and it very rarely gets fed back to the wider cohort. In some ways, quite rightly, you know, it's a strategic meeting, but that is an example where maybe some representation from that could be brought to the relevant ONS to have a wider discussion, or even just receive a report. Alex, can I just ask then, if we're heading towards full council, obviously there has been a consultation, it can't be consulted on forever. What do you perceive the mechanism? Say if Councillor Kerr has some queries, or any other councillor has queries, do you expect that to be brought up at the full council? And then maybe, is there a process for amendments to be put forward? Or how is that going to work? Because I think, because it's very procedural, obviously it has to be very carefully handled. Is there going to also be, as the agenda is published for full council, a reminder for councillors to have a good look at that particular item, so that you can maybe preempt any queries that there may be prior to the full council meeting? And finally, I think it's timely, because if this can be, obviously we'll have to see what the full council does, but if it's adopted and agreed, this would be an excellent document for all of the new chairs and vice chairs and committee members to actually read and understood. And will it be part of the training and the introduction for the various chairs and overview and scrutiny, vice chairs and members as well? So I think it'd be really good to remind them, all of us, on all of these particular processes and I suppose powers is the word that we have in overview and scrutiny.
Chair, in response to your second question, which is probably the more straightforward one to answer, then absolutely yes, we envisage within Craig's Democratic Services team that this will be a document that we use for the purposes of training, both with our own colleagues and also with members more broadly. So when we sit down with councillors who are appointed to those chair and vice chair positions next year, we'll be going through this document and using that to shape some of the conversations that we'll be having around selecting items for scrutiny and planning scrutiny activity over the course of the year. In terms of further amendments, there is always that option available to this committee to endorse this protocol subject to further consultation or comments. I would urge that perhaps that comes with a caveat that perhaps that any further changes to the protocol are agreed through you, perhaps as the chair, before going to full council, we could reflect those changes in any report that's presented to the meeting. If you simply wish to endorse the protocol, it would go as a minute extract that Stephen would prepare from this meeting and then be considered by full council. Would absolutely communicate with all members beforehand and encourage everyone to consider it beforehand. And finally, just in response to your comments, Councillor Wright, I think that's an entirely fair challenge, and they're both things that we could do more of. Involvement of local stakeholders in the scrutiny process is always really valuable. It's something that we haven't done much of in recent years. I think if we're being completely candid, probably due to resource pressures on the scrutiny team. But certainly in that task and finish environment that we talked about, there is always scope to hear views from residents and speak to service users and that kind of thing. Be a bit more creative about how we conduct scrutiny, because it doesn't necessarily all have to take place in this kind of setting.
I would agree with that. I know community scrutiny has utilised the expertise of, I believe they had a member from Derby Bid come in January to reflect on the offer of the Christmas market, and similarly they've brought in the constable from Derbyshire Police to comment on violence against women and girls, but it's certainly something that we should be looking to utilise more. And I think point 11 in the protocol, relationship with partners, is trying to encourage that.
Okay. I mean, I'm personally, I'm just obviously a chair, but I'm happy with it as it stands. I think it's a solid document. I'm not convinced that there's a great deal missing. However, I do accept that Councillor Kerr has issues with various aspects of it, but it does need to go to full council. So I don't know. I would probably suggest, Councillor Kerr, that you send the issues that you have to Alex and CC me in. Unless you have a recommendation, you can put it to the board members to see whether you want to.
Chair, I was going to suggest that the recommendations as they stand, 2.2 is amended to say recommend the protocol to hands subject to any changes agreed between officers and the chair of this committee prior to the full council meeting, as Alex was suggesting, for him to consider and you to endorse or otherwise. And then that gives us a process.
I mean, we can do that. That's not a recommendation to cabinet. That we can agree.
That's the recommendation on this paper.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy to take that as long as it's not going to slow the process down. I mean, obviously that invitations for everybody as well. If there's something that you would like us to consider, Alex, you okay with that?
Yeah, I'd be entirely happy with that process. I would suggest a short final period of consultation with all members. We could circulate the protocol after this meeting and ask for any comments to be back by perhaps the middle of April, and then obviously we can then get into preparing a report for the AGM in late May.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to put a recommendation to Cabinet to welcome the report. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Wright? Thank you. Councillor John Wright. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on. Thank you very much, Alex. Okay, so moving on then to the Council Cabinet agenda. Let's have a look. So, item 8 is what we're dealing with from that point onwards. So, development of adult social care extra care scheme at Bramblebrook House. I'm not sure who's... Oh, okay, off you go.
Thank you, Chair. This report outlines the proposal for a development at Bramblebrook House. And it was Bramblebrook House and Humbleton View, which is in the Littleover ward, and that would provide up to 90 units of affordable extra care in the form of apartments. Extra care housing allows people to live within their own self-contained homes in a community setting with access to on-site care and support. This site actually forms the largest site that is actually in the council ownership that is available and suitable to provide us with extra care. Concept level designs and costings have taken place, and pre-application engagement with planners hasn't shown any reasons the site couldn't secure planning consent for this purpose. The proposed development does represent a major investment, and project governance is in place in line with the council's project management methodology. It is proposed to deliver the site through a two-stage contract with the decision to proceed at the end of the pre-construction phase to the being dependent on a number of conditions, which will include securing planning consent, a robust and detailed cost plan, and sufficient allocation of funding from Homes England. The recommendations are to approve the redevelopment of the former site to provide an extra care development subject to a successful application to Homes England for the grant, which is detailed within the report. Also to approve the required project-specific budget of just under 26.6 million from within the overall approved HRA capital programme. To approve the submission of a grant application for grant funding to Homes England. To delegate authority to vary the value of the funding application approved under recommendation 2.3. To delegate authority to accept any funding allocated as a result of the application, and that would be subject to confirmation by Head of Legal Services about the terms and conditions of the funding agreement. Also delegation to submit a grant application to any other relevant source of capital funding that may be identified during the development design process, and to accept any funding allocated as a result of that application, again subject to confirmation of funding terms and conditions. Again, another delegation to make the final decision to proceed and to enter into all contracts necessary to deliver the project, subject to compliance with contracts with the Council's financial regulations and contract procedure rules. Also to approve expenditure of just under £821,000 on the pre-construction phase in advance of the confirmation of Homes England grant. It needs to be made clear that if the grant application is unsuccessful, this expenditure would actually be considered abortive and would then be charged to the revenue of the HRA. Also to agree to the designation of the homes on the site as dwellings for occupation by the disabled and by persons of pensionable age in accordance with the Housing Act, and as such they would be treated as exempt from right to buy. The reasons for the recommendations are to allow us to deliver extra care housing to meet the housing and care needs of older and disabled people in Derby. It also makes best use of surplus brownfield land in the council's ownership. And it also ensures effective governance, oversight and budgetary control of the project. Generally, we have an ageing population, and in Derby, we're no different. That is expected to increase from over 65s from about 16.6% in 2021 to 21.2% by 2039. The Council's Older Persons Housing Strategy does identify need and does ask us to make sure we provide a wide range of good quality, suitable and affordable accommodation for our older citizens, along with appropriate information and advice to better enable them to make informed and appropriate housing choices. Extra care housing is intended to prevent, reduce and delay the need for more intensive care and support. It actually allows people to remain independent for longer within their home and offers a more cost-effective alternative to care delivered in standalone properties. It also offers benefits for couples and families, allowing them to live together for longer. There are currently 5 extra care housing developments within Derby, so this would be the 6th. They vary in size and they are outlined within the report. The proposed development is on a site that has been vacant since Humbleton View closed, and that was demolished over 10 years ago. Bramblebrook House actually closed in 2019, and that was actually demolished last year. They have actually been allocated for this purpose of delivering extra care in the draft local plan 2023 to 2043, which is currently out for consultation. And both sites have been appropriated into the housing revenue account for delivery of affordable homes. A concept design has been produced, which shows that we can actually deliver up to 90 apartments and that is what is being allowed for in the local plan. It also provides a small bistro cafe, residence lounge, activity room, spa therapy room, care office, housing management office, mobility scooter storage and staff facilities, as well as some external amenity space for residents and on-site parking. The development is subject to planning, and it does outline in the report that we would be looking at taking a planning application later this year. So it is possible that there would be changes made to the scope outlined in the report. As the design progresses, it is planned to engage with existing extra care customers and other forums within Derby so that we can actually have feedback and comments from them, and we can see where that can be incorporated within the design. As with the existing extra care schemes, residents would be nominated by adult social care team in accordance with a nominations protocol that we have in place, but all applicants would need to be eligible and qualify for affordable housing under the housing allocations policy. Although most residents are likely to be older people, there wouldn't be an age restriction on this accommodation, and young adults who also have an eligible care need could actually move into this. So this would be one of the first projects where we are actually looking at people with a care need but of a working age. The design will actually mean that the properties will all meet either M42, which is an accessible and adaptable dwelling, or M43, which is a full wheelchair accessible dwelling. The care services would be based on site and they would be procured by adult social care. And this contract would have three key elements, which is the planned care and support for the customers, a core wellbeing service that offers the emergency response and temporary flexible support for all residents. And it would be a partnership approach to working with housing partners and other agencies. Housing management and maintenance of the building would be carried out by Derby Homes, and there would actually be on-site accommodation for some of their staff. We're also developing a joint working protocol with them to make clear all roles and responsibilities from the colleagues from different teams would have. The development will also provide a biodiversity net gain and with a 10% increase in requirements with planning conditions. The delivery and milestones are that we would be looking at submitting a planning application targeting October 2026. Once we've actually secured planning, we can then actually start submitting a formal grant application to Homes England. They do request that either planning is submitted or secured before the application is made. We would then look at actually starting on site in Q3 in 27-28 with a practical completion in Q1 29-30. We've already got a dedicated project board in place to oversee the delivery of the project, and an outline business case has been reviewed by the Council's PMO board in November 2025. That outline business case now forms the baseline for the costs, benefits and the timescales for the project. Once the contract has completed the pre-construction phase, we will actually then develop a full business case, and that would again go to the PMO board. Hopefully that would be in Q1 of 27-28. Key internal stakeholders from Adult Social Care Commissioning Team and Derby Homes have been engaged through the project board, which has been running for the past 18 months. As the design develops, like I say, we will engage further and try and incorporate some of the feedback into the design. We have looked at other options for the site. One of those is that we could procure a development partner to deliver the project instead of the council. We did explore this option in the summer of 2025 and asked for formal expressions of interest through the Homes England partner DPS, but only 2 expressions of interest actually came forward. it was decided that proceeding further along that route created a high risk that if one or both parties dropped out of the process, we would lose competitive edge, and then it wouldn't proceed anyway. Once the project has secured planning and that the site has been de-risked, if we did decide not to proceed, this option could be explored again as the site could prove more attractive to partners. We could actually develop the site for general needs council housing. As we know, there is a urgent need for affordable housing, and the site would be developable. It would actually be much lower density on this site. There are a lot of site constraints due to the topography of it, and there are a number of trees on the site. So instead of getting about up to 90 dwellings, in all probability, we would only get about 25 or 30 if we went down a general needs housing route. We've also got a pipeline that is being worked on in conjunction, which this project is part of, and that is actually delivering general needs properties on other sites in the city. We could actually sell the site on the open market. We do think that there would be a strong market for it, but on that basis, although it would generate an income, it would not likely provide much in the way of affordable housing, because it would then be subject to a Section 106. So it would then be a viability, and it would only be a maximum of 30% that would be delivered. So very low numbers. If the site was sold, however, the site is actually held in the HRA, so any capital receipt would then go into the HRA and it would not go into the general fund. On the capital, it would be the largest capital investment, and is about half, again, of the current new build capital programme. The calculations that we have modelled on is that the grant would be at 41% of the total scheme cost, with 15% funded from ring-fence right to buy receipts. The remaining 44% would be from HRA borrowing. The project will not progress without the Homes England funding. The actual Homes England funding is a substantial and significant increase that is available over the next 10 years, and that is just over £27 billion. We have actually already discussed this project with Homes England, and we have also factored in the timescale and added inflation factors with the discussions on the figures that we have been discussing with them. We can't actually confirm the exact amount of grant that will be requested until we've got the planning consent and we have got the REBA Stage 4 cost plan in place, hence the delegation about varying the amount of the grant application. I think the report does set out breakdown on the actual spend over the following years, so I can take any questions on those if anyone has them later. So what we've also done is we have checked financially on the finances, and we have also modelled it with a lower level of Homes England funding at 37% of the scheme cost. And that would require a higher level of borrowing. That would increase to 48%, but that would allow us to retain the right to buy receipts at 15%. Some of the areas are not eligible for Homes England funding, such as the cafe and potentially the site offices. So we do have to separate those costs out, but we have allowed for that within our funding model. Increased capital cost is the principal financial risk, but the Stage 2 cost plan has been prepared by a professional cost consultant and has been benchmarked against similar schemes, so that we are as assured as we can be at this stage that the scheme can be delivered within the budget. Other risk cost scenarios we have modelled with an impact of a 5% increase on the base build cost, in addition to a lower level of Homes England funding. And again, we can actually still make the project break even on those. We are looking at the properties being let at a social rent with service charges. So that is generally a lower rent than an affordable rent, which would be at 80% of market. We calculate that in the first year of operation, there would be an operating surplus of 227,000, and that would grow year on year, but this would be offset by the capital loan repayments until the project actually broke even. Risks to the project is the inability to get the assumed level of grant funding, general inflation, cost of mechanical and electrical provision due to lack of diversity in the supplier market. And that's due to the fact that we are obviously looking at quite an energy efficient build and design. Volatile capital values of extra care properties, their market value does actually influence the social rent that is set. Unforeseen abnormal costs on site, but we have actually undertaken some initial surveys and we did actually arrange for the demolition of the building, and we have done intrusive ground investigations. And then there is the risk of the abortive costs for pre-construction phase if the project didn't actually progress. We have actually mitigated for these risks. There are some legal aspects, and we would actually be working with the council's legal and procurement teams, and they would be providing support throughout the project. We've also arranged for external legal advisors to prepare amendments to the JCT 2024 design and build contract, and that would control cost overruns and delays on the site. Generally on climate, because this is a new build, of course, there is the impact that it will actually be using more energy than if the site was left vacant. But what we have done is we are looking at trying to achieve the Future Homes standard. We've also undertaken an initial whole life carbon assessment, and throughout the design we will be looking at opportunities to reduce the embodied carbon. On the equalities, we have, as I said, expanding the extra care offer is a key part of the older person's housing strategy. The design is actually accessible, so suitable for ambulant and wheelchair users. And we have actually looked at the design principles for extra care housing, which is a nationally recognised good practice guide, which includes sections on designing for people with physical frailty, cognitive impairment, visual impairment and hearing impairment. So it is quite all-encompassing. There is also the community life within extra care. So there would be the residence lounge, activity rooms, seating areas, and as I said, external space for the residents, and a small cafe which will be open to the public. We've also undertaken a qualities impact assessment, and it did not identify any direct negative impacts on people with any protected characteristics. Also, because we are looking at a social rent, it does actually help to address socio-economic disadvantages. There is also in Appendix 1 some figures in there that does demonstrate that there is the potential for some general cost savings to adult social care's budget, because we do have the figures that indicate that residents in extra care who have moved in from their own properties do very often have a lower care need. In part that is due to the accessibility of the properties. We've also undertaken some benchmarking of costs across the city, and we've looked at that, and we do feel that there is the potential for approximately a saving of up to £333,000 per year. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bolton first, then Councillor John Wright.
It's some advice, really. The officer who presented the report mentioned the planning committee 6 or 7 times. In your view, is it practical that members of the planning committee, there are a few of us here, should not get involved in this debate?
I've thought about this, Councillor Bolton, and I was going to say we're not going to discuss the planning process in terms of whatever decision is made, because several of us are on that committee. Me personally, I think by saying that we will remain very open-minded, and this is a very specific scrutiny of the report rather than delving into any pros, cons or otherwise of a particular application. I think personally I feel confident we can discuss this and we don't have to leave, but that's a decision for yourself. But I'm very confident that we can do that, and I will, as chair, ensure that we don't stray into any territory about the actual planning process. But on that, before I go to John Wright, I will say you have mentioned that planning, the grant is somewhat dependent on the planning outcome, and you also know that there's been pre-application discussions in the report. So can't planning come before the capital pre-construction spending?
We actually need the pre-construction spending to actually develop the design up to the REBA stage 4, which would then be at the stage we would normally take it to planning submission.
That's answered that question. Can you also offer, I'm not put you on the spot about every detail of that capital, pre-construction capital spending, but it is a significant amount of money, well over £750,000, 820,000. Can you give us a flavour of what that work actually is? I know you've mentioned it in the round, but just briefly, just to give us a flavour.
What that will involve is there will be quite a detailed design on the mechanical and electrical aspects. So that will be the heating, the cooling of the building. That has a significant impact on the overall design. So if we were to introduce some form of ducted air cooling system, that impacts on the floor to ceiling height that's needed, which then impacts on the scale of the building, which is why we need to have that in place. Also, it's felt that by doing the detailed design, it will allow us a more accurate cost plan. And by actually doing it on the two-stage procurement process, where we are working with the contractor that will actually deliver the building, subject to further approval, that they will then be involved. They can also guide us on, use their experience on problems that they found on built form. So previously we had been looking, for example, at a steel frame. We did do some developer engagement, and they were recommending changes to the form that we had been looking at. So we have done some initial work, but it would be that detailed design, making sure that the properties are meeting the design standards that we want them to meet, and rather than where we would normally go through more of a design and build, where we take it to a certain stage and then pass it on to the contractor. We're engaging with the contractor at that earlier stage. So it does incur some higher design costs, but also we are also engaging with another, which would be our representative on the mechanical and electrical, and they would be guiding us as to the options that are put forward as to which would be the best with regards to the actual running cost, the maintenance cost. So it's looking at the whole life cycle costs, so they would be representing us. We would also have project manager in place. That would be an external appointment, and they would be there again representing us with the contractor. So it's not just the architects and those design fees, it's actually the project consultancy fees as well that would be included in there.
Thank you. I will come to you in a second, Councillor. I do have lots of the questions, but I will pause and let others have us. Can I just ask this, though? I found it in here when I was reading it earlier on. The 820,000 is capital. But you've mentioned a few things there that would seem to be revenue. So is there a revenue, is revenue in the mix on this one? Because you're saying about architects' plans. Well, I'd say that was revenue rather than capital, for example. Is there a revenue aspect that I'm not getting here?
Any cost associated with the delivery of a building, those fees can actually be capitalised as long as the build progresses. So that is why at the moment, yes, it will come from capital on the basis that we're going to have a wonderful scheme that's going to be on budget and will be delivered in-house. But if the project didn't proceed, then it would fall to the revenue. So it would then change from capital to revenue.
Councillor John Wright, thank you very much for letting me ask those few questions before it came to you.
Yeah, and can I thank Paul Clark and Michael, is it Gilly, who have answered a lot of my questions before the meeting. But I've got a couple of questions on the finance and then one more broadly. Just carrying from Councillor Holmes' question, it sounds as though that 800k is sunk unless this project goes ahead, and it couldn't be used, for example, if I know your market testing to go out for another developer to do it wasn't successful because there was only two and you felt the risk was too high. With this much more detailed planning, isn't there opportunity, if the financials don't work out for us to do it in-house, to go back out to market with a much more attractive proposal to a developer? Because the amount of information that you now, if the project's been going for 18 months and we're spending 800k on pre-development work, that would be a much more attractive proposal to go out for a private sector developer to develop it, in which case we probably could recover that 800k. My second question, which was related to this, is you talked about it would have an operational surplus of something like £250,000 fairly early on, but that's balanced against the debt cost as well. And you didn't actually say when the break-even point would come, I don't think. And your contingency for, I think you said 5%. I mean, in today's world, in terms of you know, all the issues that our economy is facing, isn't that a very modest contingency in terms of the viability of the project? So I suppose the question is, how long will it take to actually break even as a project? And that question in terms of, have you considered going back out to market test based on all this, a much more attractive business case?
So if we decide not to proceed in-house, then yes, we can look to go back out to the market. As you say, because we would have that more detailed design, it should hopefully then be more attractive to the market. Costs, yes, they would be sunk, although if we go out to the market and we were looking at selling the site to them to deliver, we would expect to recover some of those costs in an enhanced land value, because obviously the work that we've put in and the securing of the planning permission does enhance the property value. So that's what we would do there. With regards to the contingency, how we build our costs up is we have a number of sums within there. On smaller projects, we would actually have a 10% contingency, but that's reflected on the fact of, you know, 10% of 1 million is a lot lower than 5% of 26.6. So we have a standard contingency. 5% is a standard for larger projects. We also within there have a number of sums that cover off things such as service infrastructure connections. So it's all of those are factored in, plus all of the fees. And like I say, we've also applied an inflation factor. And that reflects the fact that it would not be going, wouldn't be on site. So we've looked at what the inflation is. That has been applied to all of the figures. So the figure that we're looking at, if we were to be on site tomorrow, then it would be a lower budget. So again, that factor is within those figures.
Yeah, and can I just, my other question is, I recognise the need for affordable, extra care housing in the city, but also at recent budget we had a amendment for a project to have a look at regenerating the city centre through housing, and that included specialist accommodation like extra care and for care leavers and for other more specialised housing. This is outside the city centre, and we're weighing that against, as you've said, in the alternatives, affordable housing, general housing. And my question is, bearing in mind you said we've got 5 of these projects in the city at the moment, was any assessment done about how the relative priority as well, because obviously general housing, affordable housing, we've got shortages of both of those in the city. In fact, we're looking for 12,500 extra units in the emerging plan. Was there an assessment in terms of the relative priority of extra care vis-a-vis all of these others?
Yes, that is something we have looked at. Like I say, this site does contribute towards the local plan. It is identified within it, delivering up to 90 units. If we looked at general needs housing, it would be a much lower density. Therefore, any that we weren't delivering on this site, we would need to be looking at alternative sites in the city. We've also got our pipeline of properties coming through. So we have actually just finished 17 new homes at the Knoll. We've got 12 on Drury Lane that are about to complete. We've got another 22 at Warwick Avenue that will be completing shortly. We've had 12 flats just started on site. These are all general needs properties that we are working on smaller infill sites. And this site is the best one that we have. We don't have any other sites that would be large enough to actually deliver extra care on. And although we've got 5 other sites of extra care within the city, there is still the demand. There's never a waiting list for extra care. As soon as a property becomes available, there are people there ready to move in. So we do know that the demand is there. So it is trying to deliver a balanced type of housing across the city and meeting the older person's housing strategy needs.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Chair. I represent Little Over Ward, so this is a site that I know well, and local people are really pleased that something is slowly, and I think it is only slowly still, moving forward on this. The site's obviously been empty for quite a while. They've seen the demolition. It's currently got a hoarding around it. And to find they received letters last week to say something is now going to happen, and that's been, I think, broadly well received. It is a very strong community, and the comments in here that they want a strong community life is one of the aspects of extra care. I think in this instance, the community ought to be looked at not just as that building, but at that building and the adjacent estate, because there is a lot of synergy and opportunity for making it a broader, wider community with shared public open space, for example. And although it says in paragraph 1.4 that the site is conveniently located close to a main bus route and a number of amenities, the number of amenities are really that little bit of open space and a secondary school and the bus stop. And otherwise, within the sort of typical 400 metres, there is only a housing. And what the potential is for this, Chair, is that this can actually bring amenities to an area that was lacking in them. And that both makes the amenities more viable And it mentions here the sort of little bistro cafe and little shop, and they would become assets for the wider community. It's also an ageing community, and I know one of the aspirations for people living in that area is that they don't want to leave that community, but they recognise that their needs change as they become older, and people do move because they need a change of building. And I'd like to know, therefore, why, when we're talking, there's reference here to look at the experience of Parkland View, where we have both social housing and owner-occupier housing within that same building. Why do we feel that that is not the right solution here, which could give us an immediate return on the investment as a small proportion of those properties, maybe 15, maybe 25%, of those properties are sold to bring a return into the council or the housing revenue account. I'm not quite sure where it would go. So that's to know the feedback from Parkland View's experience and why we don't want mixed tenure here is my first question. My second question is predominantly about the purchase and procurement process, because it talks about the level of embodied carbon in a project like this, which will be high, but it doesn't. The height of that cost is very much in our expectations. It's in our gift as to what we put in the purchase requirement. So if we make a priority to say we want it to be a low carbon build, then we should be offered a low carbon build. I happened to drop into a programme halfway through about building a skyscraper somewhere in the States. We're not talking about a skyscraper here, we're probably talking about 3, 4, 5, possibly 6-storey. But there, they were building it out of wood. And they were sequestering carbon into the main structure of that building, and I think the timber was actually coming from Scandinavia. So that was quite exciting. So it doesn't need to be bricks and mortar with a high carbon, embodied carbon. It could be a different way of building if we put that into our purchase criteria as part of that bid. And I just wonder whether that is something that's been looked at. I think if it was that sort of building, it might actually be able to be constructed more rapidly, because it could be some of that construction cost could be off-site, and we do see some of these modern methods of construction, which I think Barratt do a lot of, as actually being quite a rapid build, which again might reduce the financial risk that we've already talked about, and bring in a different way of looking in a different example into the city as to how we might be dealing with some of the challenges of climate change.
Yes, we do have some older person shared ownership within Parkland View. What we have found is that demand is somewhat erratic when it comes to that they become available. The lease terms do require that the service charge is continued if there is rent. So if it's not at the 75%, so older person shared ownership is that you purchase up to 75%, the retained equity, there is no rent on the 25%. So if somebody purchases a 25% share, there is rent payable on 50%. What we have found is that we have had properties in Parkland View where they do have to continue paying the rent until that property is actually sold, which is a financial drain on the family. We do come to arrangements where it is temporarily halted and then met from the capital from the sale receipt. But that can, as we know, that sale process can take quite a time. So we're talking it can be several months of rent that families are having to find. Also, like I say, there is still the ongoing service charge that needs to be met. We do find that it does take quite a time for the extra care, and that's the reason why we have said about going for affordable rent or rental across the whole of this, because we do know that we have got huge demand for affordable rent extra care without going down the OPSA option. And if we do have people that are interested in purchasing, we do still have some of the, there are still some of the OPSA at Parkland View, which would give them an opportunity there. With regards to low carbon build, at the moment the form of construction has not been finalised. We do need to be mindful, however, that things such as timber frame, high rise, it's not always the norm for many of the developers, and as such it's not their area of speciality, and those forms of construction can actually come out as higher in the actual capital cost, although it is addressing the embodied carbon. So we are looking at different ways that we can actually do that, but like I say, at the moment we don't know what form of construction would actually be used.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions and queries? Quickly, Councillor Kerr.
When we are, and people who are on the planning committee will be aware of this.
Just make sure we don't stray into
No,
any
I'm not going to stray into it. It's the generality that when we are looking at a housing development, we look to put the affordable housing pepper potted around the estate so that you've got a mixed tenure within a particular community. This is a community. On Parkland's View, we have a community which is a mixed tenure community because of what has been set up. And for the majority of the life of a particular flat, the flat will be occupied. And having a mixed tenure within that building and the opportunity for people who live in that community to aspire and wait for the property to become available because they want to stay in that community is a different situation to Parkland View, where the housing is very, very different and the adjacent housing is mostly also affordable housing. So I would very much like, Chair, for this to be reviewed and not automatically considered to be only for social housing, because I think building a community is important as part of building property. I've got a proposal for that.
The recommendation, if you can seek a seconder once you've presented.
So to recommend to Cabinet to consider up to 25% of flats to be available for private purchase, as in Parkland's View, to help develop stronger links with the adjacent housing community.
Councillor John Wright seconds that. Okay, can we have a vote whether we accept that recommendation to go to Cabinet? All those in favour? Any against? Okay, that's carried. Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Right, we do have to move on, but really... Oh, sorry, carry on. I've got two very quick questions, but if you want to just...
Okay, sorry, I just did want to say that I think if you're going to put that in, we do need to be very mindful that that could have a significant impact on the financial viability of the project, because it has been appraised as it all being rent. And I wouldn't want something to go through that actually meant that we could not deliver the project as a whole, because we are trying to actually deliver up to 25% as sale. Also, it would need to be an affordable sale product, because we're using HRA money, which means that we couldn't deliver private sale.
Okay, it's down to Cabinet whether they accept that or not. So it has been agreed, and the Cabinet will have a look at it in due course and make a decision. So I don't... Sorry, Councillor Kerr.
Can I just comment on, yes, just that it would be helpful to Cabinet if there is some more information on those finances and the Homes England situation for that meeting.
I'm sure officers are going to obviously give them a full briefing about the consequences of a recommendation, and they'll consider it fully and make a decision. Very, very quickly, I know we need to move on. So how confident are we of the Homes England funding and also the right to buy element? So can we just very briefly explain the logic and process behind the scheme being exempt? Just those two things, if we can finish off with those, if that's all right.
Obviously, with it being exempt, that does mean that we wouldn't lose new homes through right to buy. and it actually meets with the requirements that are stipulated within the Housing Act for a property to be exempt from right to buy. So it does actually protect the city's investment in the project. Sorry, what was the...
How confident are we with the homes? Yeah.
Homes England, yes. Like I say, we have had initial discussions with them. It is a project that they are quite keen on, and they've also, within their new, the 27 billion, they have actually said that 60% of that 27 billion has been earmarked for social rent, of which this project is social rent. We've also got a reasonable track record of securing Homes England funding. So we managed to secure funding for a social rent project last year. And that one's on site and is due to complete later this year. So it's ongoing discussions with them. So we are pretty confident that it will go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I think it's fair to say that it does carry some risk, and I think that the Cabinet are going to have to accept that in regards to this project, should they proceed with it. So I think that's for them to consider. But obviously, thank you very much. You've been excellent in terms of answering all the questions and queries, so thank you for that. Okay, we'll move on then. Item 9, which is approval of the joint policy for aftercare under section 117 of the Mental Health Act 1983. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Karamjit Singh Chokra. I'm Head of Mental Health and Occupational Therapy. So I'm presenting the report for the approval of the joint policy for aftercare under section 117 of the Mental Health Act 1983. So the enclosed Cabinet report outlines the revision of the existing policy around section 117 arrangements under the Mental Health Act 1983 for health and social care. Section 117 of the Act places the legal duty on councils and the NHS to jointly provide ongoing support to people who have been detained in hospital for mental health treatment under qualifying sections of the Act. So the parameters of section 117 entitlement, the aftercare support starts when the person leaves hospital, is provided free of charge, it must meet needs linked to the person's mental health, and the purpose of aftercare is to prevent relapse and avoid unnecessary readmission to hospital. The duty can last for many years and in most cases for life unless a formal decision is made to end that aftercare where it's no longer needed. So section 117 aftercare can only be ended by a formal joint decision by the responsible health body and local authority. And aftercare can only end if the person permanently resettles outside England or Wales or a formal review confirming it's no longer required. The previous policy was last updated in 2018 and the revision brings it in line with current national policy and guidance. The most notable updates centre around a clear, more defined understanding of the provisions within legislation, as well as the incorporation of recent case law that informs our approach. These legal clarifications were aligned with the latest guidance and responsibilities. There's a key shift with an increased emphasis on supporting our community mental health teams to work in a more person-centred and strengths-based way, especially when it comes to defining aftercare, what aftercare should look like for each individual. This approach aims to ensure aftercare is tailored to people's specific circumstances, building on what matters to them most and working on their existing strengths and support networks. The ending of section 117 entitlement is not a new addition to the policy, but better defined in line with statutory guidance. The previous policy did not go into as much detail in these areas, whereas the new policy does explicitly address them. The joint policy is needed to ensure the Council is meeting its statutory responsibilities. Decisions around funding and support are consistent and defensible. People with lived experience receive clear, coordinated and person-centred support, and the health and local authority partners are working to the same agreed approach. So the recommendations for the Cabinet to approve the joint policy for aftercare. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. First one back for me. it's striking that demand has, it says demand has increased 67% in 5 years. So I'm probably not wording this very well, but does that reflect population health issues, or is it a changing in the process, or what's being offered that has captured more of those who need this support? Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. So, in terms of there's an increase in demand, and we're seeing that nationally, increase in mental health presentations. So whilst there are increases in support also, we're definitely seeing an increase in the population coming through the system. So people presenting with new mental illness or mental health issues being detained is certainly on the increase. So the figures do reflect that for the past 5 years.
Thank you. Councillor John Wright and then Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, I mean, mine was just a comment really about, I've got a little bit of previous experience from my previous roles in Section 117, but I'm by no means an expert. And I would have thought, I mean, to me, it looks a very well thought through policy and addresses the needs. But I think I would reflect back on Alex's comments about a specialist subgroup of this, because if we are really going to scrutinise policy, then and this is such an important policy because you're talking about people's lives to some extent in relation to this, that I really think it ought to have been scrutinised by a subgroup that's got the specialist knowledge to provide that input. And certainly, I mean, obviously it's a matter for Cabinet whether they do or not, but I would hope next year when we implement the new scrutiny procedures that this type of thing doesn't come to executive scrutiny, it goes to a subgroup with the right people around the table.
I mean, it has to come through us if it goes to Cabinet, that's a given, but I understand what you're saying as well. There's obviously that other pathway. And it would be, I'd be amazed if it hasn't touched the ONS process outside of us, but that's something probably we can take offline and have a look at. Councillor Kerr, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. This is also something which I've had some contact with through casework, and I think that this is going to be a very helpful document to work with, and I think consistency between ourselves and the NHS is going to be, I think it's absolutely vital. My first question was also going to be about that increase, and I wondered how much that increase might be driven by lack of capacity within the NHS to assess and deal with patients in a timely manner, so that they are being extended, having an extended period in prior to assessment, and they've therefore got into Section 117 due to inertia within the NHS. We know that the NHS is really struggling at the moment, and you may or may not have comments on that. It would have helped me to have had a list of acronyms for this document, so whether it's possible to put that in as part of the final version. Obviously, the majority of people reading it will be professionals, for whom most of these will be obvious, but for somebody who's trying to understand the system and is coming to this document maybe to support a loved one or a family friend, to have a list of acronyms would be helpful. The other thing that I wasn't sure about is that whether we're talking about standard operating policy or standard operating procedures, in that the joint guidance keeps referring to procedures, but the appendix is referring to operating policy. And I don't know whether the terminology is correct in either one place or not, and I just need somebody who understand it better than I do to make that judgment. And finally, what I don't understand is how this relates, or whether it does relate, to the deprivation of liberty safeguards and whatever's going to replace that, and how this work relates to that work. And I think that at least a couple of paragraphs to acknowledge that exists as well would be helpful to be able to put this into some wider context.
Thank you. If you need to clarify any of those questions, just dip back in, but I don't know if you can respond to that.
So I'll deal with the question around whether it's a policy or procedure. So it's a standard operating procedure. The Section 117 policy is the actual policy document. The standard operating procedure is how the policy will be implemented in practice. So there's probably an amendment in wording that can be made to that. Agreed with the acronyms. I think within health and social care we are pretty bad in terms of using acronyms, so I can put that into the revision of the policy so it's made clear to anyone referring to those. In response to your first question around the increase in terms of presentations or people known to mental health services, I think there's a number of drivers around those. I think capacity is just one, but there's also different determinants around poorer mental health outcomes for people, particularly around COVID. The first lockdown, there was a 20% increase nationally in terms of detention rates. So some of that spike was seen through COVID, but generally there is an increasing poorer mental health in the population. And finally, just in relation to the liberty protection safeguards or the deprivation of liberty, it's not separate from it, from this policy. It does complement it, if you like, but they are two separate pieces of legislation that are seen in isolation, and they do meet, and where they do meet, that's considered by professionals in individual circumstances.
Thank you. So, Councillor Kerr.
So maybe it would be appropriate to put in a paragraph just giving a reference to dolls within this one.
Within the policy? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I can know that. Can I just ask, I mean, it's a complex area, obviously it's definitely not an area of expertise for me by any stretch, but unless I'm mistaken, is there Health Act reforms on the horizon? Do you perceive any impact via those that would change the approach that we've got in the report?
So, in terms of yes, the mental health, the amendments to the Mental Health Act have been passed through. The implementation phase is expected to be over a 10-year period. There's minor amendments to Section 117 entitlement, and that's more so around ordinary residents, i.e. which local authority is responsible. So that when that part of the Act is turned on, if you like, we'll make amendments to the policy as necessary.
Are there any more questions, queries? Councillor, oh no, okay. Yeah, I think we can certainly welcome the report. Do you have a seconder for that? Okay, can we note that, please? Thank you. All right, thank you very much. Moving on, item 10 is Crisis and Resilience Fund, which is brackets, acronym, CRF, Scheme of Delegation. Don't know who was going to represent this one.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. I'm Jane Witherow. I'm the Head of Customer Engagement and Registration Services and the Welfare Reform Area, which this falls into. So this report is seeking approval to delegate authority to the Strategic Director for People Services in consultation with the Director of Finance, the Section 151 officer, the Strategic Director for Place and the Cabinet Member for Communities, Equalities and Public Safety, as this fund sits across so many areas of the organisation and the city, to finalise and implement Derby's plan to deliver the Crisis and Resilience Fund in line with the DWP guidance. Delegation is being asked due to the very tight implementation timetable. The scheme must launch on the 1st of April, which can be elements initially, and the delivery plan for year one must be submitted by the 30th of June 2026. Delegated authority ensures compliance, timely mobilisation and flexibility to respond to emerging need without repeated Cabinet decisions. We report into both the Poverty Action Group and the Demand, Insight and Prevent Board. The fund totals 4.761 million, consolidating previous funding streams, and will be delivered within the grant envelope with robust monitoring and governance arrangements. The fund replaces the Household Support Fund and the discretionary housing payments and introduces a new 3-year programme from April 26 to March 29. Its purpose is to provide fast, flexible support to low-income households, including those households not in receipt of benefits that are experiencing financial shock, and to prevent repeat hardship by strengthening financial resilience and community support, the emphasis being on resilience. One challenge we face is that the guidance says we can no longer offer blanket awards. This means some elements of the previous Household Support Fund, such as the Universal School Holiday Vouchers, will not continue in the same format. However, we can use our discretion to include holiday support, so we're working on what that might look like for Derby. This approach directly supports Derby's poverty strategy by protecting residents in hardship while helping prevent future crises, and conversations with our stakeholders, both in the community and partners, have already begun. So in summary, the fund provides an opportunity to move from reactive crisis response, i.e. a sticking plaster, towards a more preventative, resilient and partnership-led for Derby residents. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, thank you for this. And given the short time frame that the government has provided for this, I think the delegations are going to be important for those people who need this. There's reference, though, in the 2.1 of presumably some sort of draft. So we've got finalised the detailed design of the scheme in line with DWP guidance, and the guidance is presumably published. So when I looked at the end of this paper, I expected to find some references to some papers, background papers, and the government's guidance doesn't seem to provide a link there for us to have a quick look at, which I think was a pity given the number of places where the government's guidance is referenced. So maybe that could be circulated to us after the meeting. Otherwise, can I just check that this is going to be going onto the council's website as soon as it can do, to be able to support the people who are going to need to be sadly taking advantage of this.
Thank you for those. Yes, happy to support the, to send out a link to the guidance. Apologies that that wasn't included. And we've already added some information onto the website that's giving people a heads up that the new scheme is coming. As soon as we're live, obviously we'll have fuller information and a link to an application form. So yeah, that we're on with the website to keep that updated.
No, thank you. I think... I mean, I don't personally have an issue with the delegation. I can understand the process. You know, it avoids repeated cabinet papers and that. And in some cases like this, it's completely reasonable, I think, and it offers the flexibility on compliance and all those other things. However, having said that, I would say, I think I speak on behalf of everybody, that we would expect monitoring of that. So we do see sight of that. As we move forward, so it's reported on, so we can obviously have that check and balance, and I think that would be a good sort of middle ground, really.
Absolutely, we do have to submit half-yearly reports to the DWP, but more than happy to bring that back more frequently than that as the board see fit.
No, thank you. Have we got any other questions, queries on that one? No? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on then to the, I think it's the final item. No, it isn't. Second to last item. Heather would have been presenting this one, but she sent her apologies. Now, it is a very in my mind, it's a very straightforward report, Strategic Leadership Board. It's to approve an annual payment, or the Cabinet to approve an annual payment of just under £3,500 to South Derbyshire District Council for hosting the SLB Joint Committee. If we have any queries, I'll just come to you in a second, Councillor Wright. If we do have any specific queries and questions, Heather has indicated that we could send them to her directly, and she'll answer them obviously prior to the Cabinet considering this paper book. Councillor John Wright?
Yeah, I mean, I read this report and I'm just incredulous, really. It's a board that the paper doesn't, it tells us what it costs and what it's designed to do, but it doesn't say it's delivered anything in its entire history. So, you know, it's no justification for it in its past format. So we're going to change it into a strategic local government group, and South Derbyshire are asking us to contribute 3,000. I know it's a fairly modest sum in terms of local government's reorganisation. £3,200 a year with a 5% uplift, when we as a council have just, despite our protests, just invested £1 million a year for our local government policy development. And you know, the leader of the council is going to be on it, but she's also deputy leader of MCA, so she's going to be telling herself what she's been doing there. It just seems absolutely ludicrous and bureaucracy gone mad. I can understand the need for a strategic board, but all of the councils that are likely to be affected by local government reorganisation, it's in their own best interest to actually get the best possible solution. So why we should be paying 3,000 to South Derbyshire to help them contribute when they should, in my view, be contributing themselves? You know, my recommendation is that Cabinet rejects this proposal and you know, sets up these new boards, and everybody contributes a proportionate share.
Is that a formal recommendation you'd like to put forward? Could you put that in writing and search for it? Do we have a seconder for that? Okay. Those in favour of that recommendation? Those against? No? Okay, it's carried. So can we capture that and see what the Cabinet make of that? It's obviously going to be their decision moving forward on this. But point taken. Now, obviously, Heather's not here to give you a reaction to that from an officer's perspective. If we could let Heather have that feedback on the recommendation that's going to Cabinet, and if we could ask her to share that response to all of the board members rather than just the person who recommended it and the seconder, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So, yeah, if Councillor Wright's going to send me that, so what I do tomorrow is I circulate to Cabinet and officers that have been present, and any recommendations that have been made to Cabinet, and obviously, yes, I'll include Heather in that email, because I'm sure she'll want to respond, or someone will, on Wednesday.
Okay. And obviously the Cabinet will respond in kind, and it'll be interesting to see what they say, Councillor Wright. Councillor Kerr, before we move on.
Yeah, I was sort of halfway to where Councillor Wright was, in that my understanding is that this joint committee is partly dealing with the MCA stuff, which we're not really interested in because we have other routes for that. But it's now dealing with some of the local government reorganisation stuff, which we are interested in. And I'm presuming that the 3,400 is the same amount that each council is being paid into, have a £34,000 pot for providing half a senior officer's time to do this. But we're going to also already putting our senior officer in to be able to support whoever's going. So it seems to be a bit out of balance, but we're only interested in half the discussion. So I don't think we should have to pay the same as everybody else. I think we're going to suggest that we ask for a discount. And we're only interested in half the discussion, so therefore, you know, there might be half the meetings, or it might be half of a meeting, and therefore should we pay half the amount? But I don't know. I
mean, in the scheme of things, and I do accept Councillor Wright's arguments there, it probably doesn't matter who pays what. I think it's such a small amount. I'm not saying that the point isn't valid here, but half of that or whatever, I think that isn't the point really. I think Councillor Wright's suggesting whether it's needed at all. But anyway, I digress. Any more comments, questions on that one? No? Okay, we'll move forward then. So item 12 is compliance Sorry we've kept you to the end. Compliance with contract and financial procedure rules. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Tony Nash, Head of Finance. This Financial Matters report deals with 3 items: the acceptance of funding from MCA, debt write-off, and an update to the Schools Capital Programme for Wren Park. The first section outlines acceptance of a total of £4.5 million of funding from MCA. This consists of £3 million worth of adult skills funding for 26-27 academic year. This funding is designed to help Get Britain working by supporting individuals aged 19 and over to gain the skills, qualifications and training they need to improve their job prospects. There is also 1.5 million youth guarantee funding for 25-26 and 26-27. This funding is for a cohort of young people who are not in education, employment or training. It is designed to support young people through their journey to work, providing work placements, apprenticeships and job outcomes. And move on to the second section. Yes,
we'll take questions then.
Yeah. The second section outlines debt write-off of £1.064 million in line with the Council's corporate debt policy. The specific debt being written off and reason for the write-off is outlined in detail in Appendix 1 of this report. For audit and accounting purposes, all appropriate debt should be written off in a timely manner. The Council regularly reviews historic debt and determines the appropriateness for write-off when all attempts to recover the debt have been exhausted. To ensure that the Council acts responsibly and every attempt to collect the income it is owed, the following actions have been undertaken. A new debt policy has been introduced in 2024, and I think I've brought that to this meeting. The debt recovery activity has been centralised in financial services, and debt management functions have been incorporated into the Council's AI project. It should be noted that all debts contained within this report have been offset against the respective bad debt provision, and there will be no financial impact that the Council has not considered and provided for. The final section outlines the update to the Wren Park Primary School scheme. Following completion of Stage 3 design and procurement, the pre-planning application advice, it is necessary to increase the 26-27 scheme budget for Wren Park by £374,000 to £2.278 million for this additional classroom. This will be funded from Section 106. It has been necessary to slightly reposition the building because of final designs to include necessary access arrangements. And in addition, foul and surface water drainage works are required, including the requirement to provide new attenuation tanks. Thank you very much. Any questions I can take back to the service? I will say that Amanda Verron from the business support was going to come today, but she's been called away to answer any questions you've got on debt. So if you have any, I'll take them away and she'll give you a full response. Thank you.
Okay, well, on that one then, if we can just sort of send this one for an answer via email. You know, it's always really frustrating when we see reports of any type where we have debt write-off, and I know that in the past we've been extremely robust in terms of scrutinising the reasons behind it. I suppose the question I would ask is, how do we compare to other local authorities in terms of this particular sort of debt write-off? Just to do that check and balance, to ensure that we're not an outliner, and also, whilst some debt write-off is probably unavoidable, clearly, because you see it time and time again within reports of various natures. Do we learn from the process, and what measures do we take, what assessments do we undertake, if you like, to actually reduce the potential of an eventual debt write-off? So obviously I'm not expecting an answer on that straight away. You get where I'm coming from with that. If that can be sent through, and then maybe an email, include everybody in that, just to give us some background on that, because you know the public find it extremely hard to understand that we write off significant amounts like this, and it does need some clarity. and some assurance that it's not just Derby City Council, for example. Can I just also ask, how do we get the feedback or the information back from MCA that gives us more information about some of these projects? Because it seems to me that we don't. Is it a specific ONS board that gets it rather than exec scrutiny? But I can't recall on the boards I'm on and in full council or any other process that we had any detailed information about MCA. So I don't know if that's something which could be fed back about informing councillors of the activities and those kind of things, because it's a select few that go into those committee meetings and those boards, and many of us aren't on those, so we don't necessarily get that feedback.
With regard to MCA, can I just check what you mean by that?
Well, in regards to the funding processes, just the whole process in itself. Councillor Kerr.
Thanks. Wren Park is a school my children went to many, many moons ago. They've well left since then. But one classroom for £2.25 million. That is a big sum of money, even if you're going to have to do some drainage and some movements and some soil. And it says that it is through its framework contractor. I'm just gobsmacked at that cost. And I just wonder what scrutiny actually happens. We may have a framework contractor, but is that actually giving us good value? How do we judge whether that's giving us good value?
So
I'm just wondering whether it's something that one of the scrutiny boards might like to look at and see whether it's actually doing us, how does it compare with other local authorities, as you've just suggested, Chair?
Yeah, so how do we I suppose what we're saying is, well, Councillor Kerr is saying is a check and balance to ensure that that isn't a lot more than I suppose, how is it being procured? Does it compare to other like-for-like kind of work to ensure that we are getting best value from it, I suppose?
Yeah, I can get you some information on that and circulate it round, but the challenge about going to a board, I'm not sure which board that would go to. It wouldn't be this one, would it? It would be CYP.
Well, can we see what comes back on that one? Just testing the value and questioning the cost to justify that, which is fair enough, and that's what we're here for, Councillor Kerr. So, Councillor Bonser.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the debt figures, it's just a query really. When colleagues feedback on the other aspects of the debt, I just wondered if there's a significant amount that's written off related to dissolved and companies gone into liquidation. And I just wondered if there's any themes around that, what sort of companies, if there's any particular types of company, or just be interested to know really.
Yeah, great question.
If there's any themes there. Thank you.
Yeah, I can get the individual detail. Obviously, this is a public meeting, so we wouldn't discuss it in the public meeting, but I can get that individual detail and send it round to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions and queries? No? Well, thank you very much for your attendance. We'll draw the meeting to a close. Thank you.